Before we dive into this spine-chilling story, please subscribe now for daily tales you won't want to miss. My name is Jane. I never thought I'd end up on an oil rig in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but here I am. It was supposed to be a temporary job, just a way to get away for a while and escape the clutter of my life back home. I didn't expect things to get so strange. When I first boarded the Abyss, I didn't notice anything odd. It was just an isolated rig, cold and mechanical, but nothing out of the ordinary. The crew seemed like regular people, their faces worn from long hours in isolation, just like me. The first rule I was told about came up during my orientation. Silent hours, they called it. The foreman, a guy named Kevin, made it sound simple enough. No one could speak or make any noise between midnight and 3 a.m. He said it was for everyone's safety. He didn't go into detail, but he didn't have to. It seemed harmless enough, just part of life on the rig, right? At first, I figured it was a simple routine to make sure the crew rested. But as the days went on, I started to feel like something was off. The nights on the Abyss were far darker than anything I'd experienced before. The air felt thick and heavy, like it was pressing in from all sides. There was a quiet hum coming from deep below the rig, almost like a low rumble. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. People always said the ocean was full of mysteries. But after a few nights, the hum began to feel wrong. Like something ancient was stirring beneath the waves, and the silence we were forced to keep was meant to keep it asleep. I didn't understand it, but I was still new. I wasn't about to question the rules. Everyone followed them, or at least they seemed to. It wasn't until the third night when I really started to feel the weight of the silence. I was alone in the break room, a cup of coffee in hand, when I heard a faint noise from the hallway. I froze, my heart pounding. It was a whisper, barely audible, but it sounded like someone else had broken the rule. I thought about going out to check, but I hesitated. No one had ever mentioned this before. What would happen if someone spoke during silent hours? I decided to wait, but when I did hear the faintest footsteps outside, I felt a chill run down my spine. I never found out who it was, but from then on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just being told to stay quiet for no reason. Something about the way the crew looked at each other when the silence settled made me uneasy. Maybe they all knew something I didn't. The days blurred together, and I found myself getting used to the rhythm of the rig. The long hours, the silence at night, it became normal, even comforting in a way. But then the first accident happened. It wasn't anything severe, just a slip in the lower levels. A guy named Mark had been working when something went wrong. He was rushed to the medical bay, and the only explanation anyone gave was that it had been an unfortunate incident. But the way they spoke about it didn't sit right with me. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. It wasn't until later that night when I got my second rule. It came from Mike, one of the senior crew members, when I was on shift alone. He leaned against the railing and glanced over at me, his voice low. "Never go to the lower levels alone," he said. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. He didn't explain why, but his eyes told me everything I needed to know. The lower levels were where the rig's machinery was maintained, where things could go wrong in an instant. But there was something more to it. Something in Mike's voice made me feel like there was more to the rule than just safety. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just another safety precaution. But after Mark's accident, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Later that night, while I was down in the control room, I overheard a conversation between two of the other crew members. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing over their shoulders, as if they didn't want anyone to overhear. "Has anyone else been to the lower levels recently?" one of them asked. The other responded with a nervous laugh. "Not unless they've got a death wish." I didn't know exactly what they meant by that, but the way they acted made me uneasy. The atmosphere on the rig had shifted. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it in the air, thick and oppressive. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I had a feeling it had something to do with the rules. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to be careful. The lower levels? I wasn't going near them alone, not if I wanted to stay safe. The days passed, and the unease continued to build. Strange things started happening. Equipment would malfunction, doors would slam shut on their own, and one of the crew members disappeared without a trace. No one seemed to question it. People just kept working like it was normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something that no one was willing to talk about. I started noticing the crew's behavior more closely. They were jumpy, always looking over their shoulders. There was a fear in their eyes that hadn't been there before. I wanted to ask someone what was going on, but I kept my mouth shut. After all, there was a rule about silence at night, and I wasn't about to break it. But as the days wore on, I began to realize that staying silent wasn't just about avoiding noise. There was something else happening on the abyss. Something ancient. Something that could be disturbed if we weren't careful. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, I knew deep down that I couldn't. The thought crossed my mind again. What if the hum wasn't just a noise? What if it was something more? Something alive, something that had been waiting for a long time. I didn't know yet, but I was beginning to sense that the rules, the accidents, the disappearances, they were all connected. And I was getting closer to finding out what that connection was. But I had to tread carefully. There were more rules to uncover, more secrets hidden beneath the surface. And if I wasn't careful, I might be the next one to disappear. The days blurred into each other, the monotonous rhythm of life on the abyss becoming routine in a way that was almost comforting. But the unease still lingered beneath the surface, creeping into my thoughts when I was alone, especially at night. The hum from the ocean floor never stopped. It was always there, like a distant, eerie heartbeat just beneath the rig. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us, listening for something. But what? It was about 3 days after the first accident when I learned the next rule. I had just finished my shift and was heading back to my quarters when I ran into Kevin, the foreman. He gave me one of his knowing looks, the kind that made me feel like he was trying to say something without saying it outright. "Storm's coming," he muttered, glancing up at the sky, which had darkened ominously. "Don't go outside unless you absolutely have to. The rig gets unstable during storms." It was then that he told me the third rule: stay inside during storms. I nodded, not questioning it. The ocean was unpredictable, and I knew storms could be dangerous. But Kevin seemed more serious than usual, his gaze hard and focused. I asked him if there was anything else to worry about, and he gave me a tight-lipped smile, his eyes flicking to the horizon. "Just stay in here," he said, "and don't wander off. Trust me." I didn't press him for more information. I could feel the tension in his voice, and I didn't want to push it. The rig had always felt a little off, but now, with the storm on the way, something about it felt even more oppressive. I could almost feel the storm brewing inside me, a quiet unease building with every passing hour. That night, the storm hit. It came on fast, with winds howling and rain slamming against the metal walls of the rig. I stayed inside, just as I was told, but the longer the storm raged, the more I felt the isolation. The hum from below seemed to intensify, vibrating through the floor beneath my feet. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my work, but the low frequency seemed to seep into my bones, unsettling me in a way I couldn't explain. I heard footsteps in the hallway, the sound of someone pacing, but when I went to check, there was no one there. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the storm messing with my head, but there was something about the way the rig creaked in the wind that made it feel alive, as if the whole structure was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I spent the night in my room, feeling the hum grow louder, more persistent, until it almost felt like the walls were closing in around me. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the thing that was making the noise, something ancient, something that had been waiting beneath the sea for who knows how long. I didn't know what it was, but I was starting to think that the storm wasn't the only thing I needed to worry about. The storm passed by morning, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The rig groaned and creaked as the winds died down, but the low-frequency hum never stopped. If anything, it seemed to be louder now, more intense. It was as if the ocean floor was calling to something that had been waiting for this moment. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of something terrible, something that had been dormant for too long. When I went to work that morning, I noticed something strange. There were fewer crew members around. The usual chatter and light-hearted jokes were gone, replaced with an eerie silence. I couldn't understand it at first. I thought maybe it was just the aftermath of the storm, but as I walked through the rig, I realized something was off. The crew wasn't acting like their usual selves. They were more tense, more jumpy, like they were waiting for something. Or someone. It wasn't until later that I learned what had happened. A man named Carl, one of the senior crew members, had gone missing during the storm. He was last seen near the lower levels, just before the winds picked up. No one knew where he had gone, and no one had seen him since. I overheard Kevin and Mike talking about it in hushed voices, their faces grim. They said it was like he had just disappeared. But what really struck me was the way they spoke about it, like it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. At first, no one talked about it openly. But as the hours passed, the whispers started. Some of the crew were saying that the storm wasn't the only thing that had been stirred up by the waves. They were talking about the thing beneath the rig, the thing that had been waiting. Some of them said it had been awake for a long time, but the storm had disturbed it, brought it closer to the surface. And when it was close enough, it could hear us. The more I heard, the more I realized that there was something we weren't being told. The hum, the disappearances, the strange rules, they were all connected. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, I knew deep down that I couldn't. Something was waking up, and the crew was trying to keep it asleep. I didn't know what it was, but I had a feeling that we were all in danger. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the rules, the accidents, even the storm, they weren't just precautions. They were keeping something locked away, something that had been waiting for a long, long time. I went back to my quarters that night, trying to push the fear out of my mind. I couldn't let myself think about it too much. But as I lay there in the dark, I couldn't help but wonder, if something was waking up, what was it going to do to us? The days on the rig after Carl's disappearance felt longer, the silence more oppressive. The air felt thick with dread, and I could see it in the crew's eyes. Everyone was on edge. There was no laughter now, no casual conversations between shifts. It was all business, all survival. I tried to keep my distance, staying focused on my tasks, but every time I walked past the lower levels, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. I had learned to follow the rules. They weren't just guidelines, they were survival tactics. But the more I followed them, the more I realized how much they controlled us. One evening, I was walking to the control room when I passed Mike, one of the senior engineers. He was standing in front of the door to the lower levels, staring down at it like it was calling to him. I hesitated for a moment before I walked up to him. "You all right?" I asked. He didn't look at me right away. When he did, his expression was unreadable, almost hollow. "Just thinking," he muttered. "About Carl. About the rules." I glanced at the door he was standing near. It was the one leading down to the lower levels, the part of the rig everyone avoided. Mike had worked here longer than most of the crew, so I figured he knew something more than he was letting on. "They say we're not supposed to go down there alone," I said, trying to sound casual. "That's one of the rules, right?" Mike nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the door. "Yeah, it's Rule 2, never enter the lower levels alone." "But," he trailed off, and I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. "But what?" He shook his head, not meeting my eyes. "There's something down there. Something we don't talk about. It's not just an oil rig anymore. It's something else. And if you go down there, you'll never come back." I didn't understand what he meant, but I didn't ask. There was no point. I was starting to get the sense that asking questions was dangerous on the abyss. The less I knew, the better. Later that night, I was in my room, trying to sleep despite the constant hum from the ocean below. I couldn't help but think of the things Mike had said. The lower levels, the rules, the disappearances. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things that didn't make sense. I needed to know more, but I also knew that if I pushed too hard, I might not like what I found. Just before midnight, I heard a knock at my door. I hesitated before answering it, wondering who would be coming around at this hour. When I opened it, I found Kevin standing there, a grim look on his face. "We've got a storm coming," he said quietly. "But it's not just any storm. It's different. I don't know how to explain it. but I need you to stay inside tonight. Don't go out. You understand?" I nodded, my heart racing. "Of course. What's going on?" Kevin didn't say anything for a moment. His eyes flicked nervously to the hallway, as if he was afraid someone might hear. "Just stay inside. And remember the rules. Don't break them. Not tonight." I didn't press him for details. I had learned by now that when Kevin said something was important, it was. The rules were meant to be followed. And tonight, I wasn't going to break any of them. The storm hit just after midnight. The winds howled like something alive, and the rig groaned under the pressure. I stayed in my quarters, staring out the small window at the black, churning ocean. The waves were enormous, crashing violently against the rig's supports. But it wasn't the storm itself that made my skin crawl. It was the hum. The sound from the ocean floor had grown louder, vibrating through the metal walls of the rig. It was like a low growl, a continuous, unrelenting noise that seemed to come from deep beneath the earth. The storm outside seemed to amplify it, making the hum almost feel like it was alive, like it was reaching up from the depths of the sea. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the hum seemed to get louder, until it was all I could hear. It felt like the sound was coming from inside my head, wrapping around my thoughts, drowning out everything else. I didn't know what to do with myself. I couldn't leave my room. The storm was too dangerous, and besides, I knew the rules. The storm was one of them. Stay inside. Don't go out. But I couldn't escape the feeling that something was wrong. That something was waking up beneath the waves. Around 2 a.m., I heard a loud crash from somewhere below. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding, and rushed to the hallway. The sound had come from below decks, the area I'd been warned to stay away from. I glanced at the clock. It was just minutes before the end of the silent hours. I knew I couldn't make a sound, not even to call out. So, I held my breath and listened. I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate. Someone, or something, was moving through the corridors. I froze, my mind racing. I had to know what was going on. I wanted to go to the control room, to check the monitors, but something told me that wasn't a good idea. I had a bad feeling. I was supposed to stay inside, to follow the rules, but I couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread in my chest. Then, just as I was about to make my way to the control room, I heard a voice, low, almost a whisper, coming from the hallway. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the tension in the air. There was someone or something else out there. I wasn't alone. I waited in my room, too scared to move, too scared to make a sound. The hum outside was louder now, almost deafening, and I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my chest. I couldn't help it. I was scared, and the rules didn't seem to matter anymore. Something was happening, something I couldn't understand, and I didn't know how to stop it. The storm raged outside, and the hum from the ocean floor grew louder, like it was calling to us. And I knew deep down that it wasn't just the storm that was coming. Something else was waking up, and we were running out of time. I spent the rest of the night locked in my room, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't quiet. The storm raged on, the sound of it mixing with the ever-present hum coming from the ocean. My pulse had never been so steady, so loud in my ears. I tried to focus on anything else, but my mind kept going back to the voice I'd heard, the whispers that seemed to rise from the lower levels. What was happening down there? What was the crew hiding from me? At 4 a.m., I finally fell into a fitful sleep, the exhaustion catching up to me. When I woke up, the storm had calmed a little, though the heavy hum still vibrated the walls of the rig. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the feeling that something was coming. It wasn't just the storm anymore. It was something else, something deeper. By the time my shift started at 7, I was barely functioning. I was still shaken, drained, but I had to push through. I couldn't let the fear take over. I pulled myself out of bed and got dressed, forcing my mind to focus on the tasks ahead. As I stepped out of my quarters, I saw Kevin standing by the door, looking more tense than usual. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound normal. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were scanning the hallway, almost like he was waiting for something, or someone. Finally, he turned to me, his expression grim. "The storm's over, but the hum, It's getting worse. I swallowed hard, trying not to show how unsettled I was. What do you mean worse? More intense. I don't know how to explain it, but it feels like it's coming for us. His voice dropped to a whisper, as if someone might be listening. It's getting closer. I tried to force a laugh, but it caught in my throat. Closer? Like how? Kevin glanced nervously down the hallway, then back at me. We don't talk about it. I'm just saying, we need to be careful. Follow the rules. Don't break them, not now. I nodded, but inside, I felt a growing sense of dread. I had a feeling the rules weren't just about protecting us from something outside. The way he spoke, it was like the rules were the only thing keeping us safe from something we couldn't even fully comprehend. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't sure how much longer I'd be able to follow them. As I made my way to the control room, I saw a few other crew members walking through the corridors. Everyone looked just as exhausted as I felt. I could hear their quiet conversations, hushed as if they were afraid to speak too loud. The tension was palpable, thick in the air. Something was off. Everyone knew it. I reached the control room and sat down, trying to focus on the screens in front of me. I checked the rig's readings. The storm had passed, but the hum from the ocean was still there. I could see the sensors picking up unusual movements in the water below, but nothing that made sense. It was like the ocean itself was alive, shifting, changing, reacting to something we couldn't see. I stayed there for hours, watching the monitors, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease creeping up my spine. When my shift ended, I left the control room, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. It followed me through the narrow halls of the rig, like a shadow at my back. By the time I reached my quarters, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. I closed the door behind me and locked it, but sleep didn't come. I lay there, staring into the darkness, waiting for something to happen, waiting for whatever was coming for us to reveal itself. The hum from the ocean was constant now, louder than before, vibrating through the very bones of the rig. And in the silence of my room, I heard it again, the whispers. Only this time, they weren't coming from the lower levels. They were coming from everywhere. The next day, things had only gotten worse. The hum was louder, more insistent, and the crew was starting to crack. People were looking over their shoulders, speaking in hushed tones when they thought no one could hear. It was like everyone had become aware of the same thing, the same creeping dread that had settled over the rig. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one wanted to talk about it. I met up with Mike again, though this time he looked different. He was on edge, his face pale, eyes darting around like he was afraid someone might be listening. He led me to a small room near the back of the rig, a place I'd never been before. The door creaked as he opened it, revealing a set of old monitoring equipment, wires hanging loosely from the ceiling. "Mike, what is this?" I asked, stepping inside. "Why haven't I seen this room before?" Mike didn't answer at first. Instead, he walked over to one of the monitors, flipping a switch. The screen flickered to life, showing an image of the ocean floor below. At first, it seemed like just another regular sensor, but then I saw it. A strange shape moving just under the surface. It was massive, almost like a shadow moving beneath the water. "What is that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mike turned to me, his face grim. "That's what's been making the noise. It's not just a creature. It's something older, something ancient. And it's waking up." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "We need to tell someone. We can't just let this go." Mike shook his head. "You don't understand. If we tell anyone, if we break the silence rule, it'll hear us. It'll know we're here. It's been asleep for so long, and the only thing keeping it from waking up is the silence. If we disturb it, we'll all be dead." The weight of his words hit me hard. The silence, the hum, the rules, it wasn't just to keep us from disturbing the creature. It was to keep the creature from hearing us, from hearing our hearts. A chill ran down my spine as the realization hit me. The heartbeat mask, the silence, the rules, they weren't just about avoiding the creature. They were to stop it from hearing us. And if we broke the silence, if we broke the rules, I didn't want to think about it. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls, and I could hear the whispers again. This time they were clearer, and they were coming from behind the walls. "We need to leave," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We need to get out of here." Mike turned to me, his face pale. "It's too late for that. The only way out now is to follow the rules. Keep quiet, don't disturb it, and pray it doesn't find us." I didn't know if I believed him, but I knew one thing for sure. We were running out of time. The tension on the rig was unbearable now. Every creak of metal, every shift in the air felt like the hum was getting closer, louder. The crew moved like sleepwalkers, eyes wide, lips sealed. No one spoke. No one even dared to look at each other for too long. I had never seen so many people this scared in my life. But the worst part was the silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the weight of it, the thick, suffocating quiet that seemed to press against my chest. It felt like the whole rig was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And deep down, I knew it was coming. I hadn't seen Mike for hours, and when I finally found him, he was standing near the edge of the rig, staring out over the water. He didn't even look at me as I approached. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, on the black, endless expanse of ocean. "Mike," I whispered, afraid to break the silence too loudly. "Mike, we need to talk. We need to figure out what to do." He turned slowly, his face hollow, drained of color. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "There's nothing left to figure out," he said softly. "It's already too late." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "We can't just give up. We can't sit here and wait for it to find us." Mike shook his head, his eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place. "You don't understand. It's not just a creature. It's something older. Something that's been asleep for so long that it's forgotten how to be anything but hunger. And we woke it up." A cold shiver ran through me. "What do you mean? How?" "The moment we stepped onto this rig," he said, voice breaking slightly, "we disturbed it. The hum, the silence, it was all part of keeping it asleep. But now it knows we're here. And it won't stop until we're all gone." I felt my stomach drop. "But what about the rules? The silence, what if we keep following them?" "It's too late," Mike whispered, his voice distant, as if he were speaking to someone else. "It's already aware of us. The silence, it's not enough anymore." I stared at him, trying to understand, but the pieces weren't fitting together. I had to get out of there. I had to do something. Anything. But before I could say another word, the hum reached a new, deafening pitch. It vibrated through the entire rig, shaking the walls, rattling the windows, even making the floor beneath my feet tremble. I stumbled, clutching the railing to keep my balance. Something was happening. I turned toward the water. It was bubbling, churning violently, as if something beneath was pushing against the surface. The water was frothing, dark and thick, and I could see the shape beneath it, moving, rising. It was massive. It was coming closer. "No," I gasped. "No, it's coming for us." Mike grabbed my arm, his grip tight and desperate. "We have to go now. It won't stop, not unless we get out of here." We didn't have time. I didn't know where to go, what to do, but I knew one thing. We couldn't stay on the rig any longer. The hum, the sound, the whispers, they were all leading us to this moment. Whatever was down there, whatever had been sleeping, was awake. And it was hungry. I ran with Mike, the two of us speeding through the halls of the rig, trying to get to the lifeboats. But the path was blocked. Crew members were already there, scrambling, trying to get away. Panic was everywhere. People were shoving, yelling, but no one was making any sound. The silence was overwhelming, suffocating. And then I felt it, a pressure in my chest, like something was pushing me down, forcing me to stay in place. The heartbeat mask, it was starting to vibrate against my skin, almost like it was alive, reacting to the sound. And in that moment, I realized something. The silence wasn't just to keep the creature from hearing us. It was to keep it from hearing our hearts. The creature could track us by the sound of our pulse. I had thought we were safe as long as we stayed quiet, but now I knew nothing could save us. We reached the lifeboats, but the chaos was overwhelming. People were already in the boats, scrambling to get away, but there was no order, no plan. The rig was sinking, and the sound from below had reached an unbearable crescendo. It was a scream, a low, guttural sound that rattled the bones and vibrated through the metal structure of the rig. And then I saw it. The shape. The creature. It was massive, rising from the depths, its form twisting and shifting beneath the water as it pushed toward the surface. Its presence was overwhelming, suffocating the air around us. It was coming for us, coming for all of us. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to do anything except react. I shoved past the others, jumping into the first lifeboat I could find. Mike was right behind me, but he looked back at the rig, his face torn with indecision. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching the chaos, as if he were waiting for something. "Mike!" I screamed, but he didn't hear me. He was already looking toward the radio transmission booth, the only thing left on the rig that could send a signal. He was thinking the same thing I was. The radio could disrupt the creature's tracking ability. It could send out a distress signal, but it would also draw the creature's attention. It would bring it closer. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. "Mike, we have to go!" I shouted again, this time pulling on his arm. I could hear the creature's growl now, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the very air. The rig was breaking apart, and there was no time left. Mike hesitated one more time, looking toward the sinking structure. But then he nodded, his face grim. "Let's go!" We didn't look back as we pulled away from the rig, the lifeboat drifting slowly into the open water. But I could still hear it, the hum, the roar of the creature. And I knew deep down that the rig was lost. There was no stopping it now. As we floated away, I felt the weight of the moment settle in. The creature was still down there, and it would always be there. The sound beneath us would never stop. And now, it was only a matter of time before it found another place to wake up. For now, though, I was safe. Safe, but haunted. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe for more creepy tales. If you'd like to support the channel, consider buying me a coffee on Ko-Fi. Every bit helps. Links in the description.